Okay, so I have to rename these images. I'll play this in the background while I do that.
Vivian, you're okay. Vivian, in spirit of hopefully not running it down the previous conversation that we had in regards to like men, I'm gonna let you know you are way off on your rhetoric on men right now. If your goal is to just aggravate every single person that could possibly consider men human beings, you're doing a fucking phenomenal job. That's what you're doing right now, because your logs are cringe as fuck. I'm letting you know that, person to person, streamer to streamer. You need to rile that shit back, unless your whole point is to start like a fucking gender war. You're not a gender abolitionist, but don't try that shit with me. Like, don't try it. I'm gonna get you in Discord and I'll make you look bad at this point. Don't try that shit with me. It's not going to work. Don't say that when you say abolish all men's... Okay, here's where we're going to go. All right. So your statements are, guys are kind of hot, but like, I'm almost always too scared to trust them. Masculinity has done a fucking number on our male population, and they're frankly not worth the possible risk of them fucking murdering you. I like to sub, but again, the idea of being tied up and completely at the mercy of a potential homicidal nut job is just a nope. Maybe some dudes would get laid if more dudes stop being dudes. Abolish men and we can abolish inceldom. Like, what do you think you're doing?
Holy shit.
What do you think you're doing here? And don't try and say you're taking a gender abolitionist route with this. What do you think you're doing here? Like, realistically.
Jesus Christ. I will say this, okay? Vivian said some dumb shit in my channel, and she was banned. She submitted a ban appeal form that she didn't really take very seriously, so she has continued to be banned. If I were to give any fair rhetorical critique to Vivian, is that Vivian says some shit in Twitch chats that are worded awfully, that are awful rhetorically, they're awful optically. It's some very charged language that people clearly seem to interpret as such quite often. So if I were to give some very serious rhetorical advice here, it would first be to Vivian, because this is like a recurring problem. This has been a problem ever since like I first met Vivian. I think Vivian is very, very smart. I think that when Vivian gets on a topic that she is confident about and she's good at like keeping her cool, she does a good job in conversations. I'll say that as well. Like, she's not somebody whose debates and stuff I necessarily dislike. It's just like when she gets heated or her language gets really charged, it's very difficult to stay with her. And that happens a lot in Twitch chats.
Do you think that anybody inside of this chat room is reconsidering what they consider to be a man, or do you think that they just think that you're just somebody who fucking hates men?
I have no idea. What do you reckon, chat? Are you thinking right now about what the word man means?
They're certainly not. I can guarantee you, I don't even have to look at chat. They all just think that you're somebody who's raving about how much you fucking hate men.
They're going to say no,
right.
no,
And
no.
then let's follow this up. Do you think that this chat room is probably going to be one of the more open chats to an argument that you have to make about critiquing men in comparison to the vast majority of humans that exist in political spheres? Do you think that this is probably one that is more amicable to your arguments than most other spheres, including IRL walking around on the street, because this would never work, IRL walking around on the street, and a lot of the places like YouTube and shit like that? Do you think this is going to be a more amicable space to that argument? Yes or no?
Probably not, no.
You think that out of all of the spaces that exist, this is not in the upper percentile for a space that would be amicable to critiquing men's behavior? My stream, where I consistently critique men's...
Yeah,
okay.
Sorry, I misheard your question.
My bad. Okay, I jumped the gun on that one.
Good.
The answer is yes.
I like that he admits it, you know, because he's going in very, very heated here. So if he makes a mistake like that, he cannot just like let it go. I think it shows more character, and it's going to keep Vivian on the line for longer to admit when he makes a little mistake like that. So that's good. I appreciate him for doing that, because for some folks, when they make a fuck up like that, they will just continue on with their questioning as if it did not happen. And, you know, that's a bit of a problem, or at least it causes problems for them in a way that Rele is not going to run into. So good habit to get into. Also, in your own personal conversations, if you find that you did that, if you find that you overshot the mark, or you can tell that you're being hypey, like, bear in mind when you know that you're heated, that you can make these like little gibs when you fuck up, right? Because you're expecting, as Rele is here, that the other person will give on their fuck ups, right? In Rele's mind, Viv has fucked up here. And Viv is going to need to admit to some of her fuck ups to please Rele or whatever, right? To appease him. So if he's expecting that of her, he needs to be more than willing to do that as well. And that's going to put her in a better mood for giving him those concessions if they come up, right? So that's going to be helpful to both parties here. So bear that in mind. If you're looking for somebody else to make concessions to you or to change their rhetoric or whatever, admitting when you have your own flaws with the rhetoric, admitting concession wherever you can is going to help your case. Your real life is not going to work like these online debates where concessions are going to make you look bad and you have a whole audience watching and you have a brand built around being right. You don't have those limitations. And whenever you're looking at these like online conversations and using that as a way to like talk to normal people in the real world, bear in mind that these people have developed their style because of constraints that they have, right? So they have all these problems with their brand and with being right all the time and consistency and the audience. You don't have those. And so I think you're missing a very important part of the equation if you continue to behave the way that they're behaving in the real world, right? Because you're not arguing in front of an audience. You're not trying to convince a bunch of people in the crowd. What you're trying to do is get the person in front of you to make concessions. And oftentimes it's only you and the other person that are talking or that are seeing what's going on. So in that regard, keep that in mind. You have a lot more ground that you could give. You have a lot more concessions you can make, and you don't look like a dumb fuck because it's just you and this other person talking here. So keep that in mind, you know, give concessions where you could give concessions because it doesn't cost you anything, right? Like for most people, most of the time, it's not going to cost you anything to admit that you were going in a little hot or that maybe you misunderstood them or things like this, right? So keep that in mind. And let's go ahead and continue. Bookie Baby doesn't want to be out on the list. If we're in the context of like doing a review, perhaps I'll mention something very specific, but I'd want to prep that. I'd want to like have quotes ready and stuff like that. I don't want to put people on blast that aren't here. And beyond that, you know, I don't think it's necessary. And the main focus of the channel, because of how many people are listening, is not to be super nice to Vivian. It's not to be super nice to Rele. It's not to be throwing other people under the bus or whatever. What it's meant to do is it's meant to help you guys because you guys are the ones listening to this stuff. And I want you guys to see where maybe these people are having an influence on you and it's negative and it's not for the best. So, you know, if you see these things in yourself, I want you to be able to fix them. Some of the best like input I've gotten from people on my Europe trip and in my email is the people that say, hey, look, you mentioned this thing that Steven does, and I saw that in me, and I stopped it. Or, hey, you said this thing that Rele does, and I understood what you meant by that, and I definitely have a little bit of that. And so I started to fix that, right? It's when you tell me things like that I'm like, oh, okay, that's the value of the channel, is you start to learn about maybe some stuff that you're picking up from these people that is not helpful in your life. And I'm not saying it's like completely bad for them. It's helpful for Rele to be interrogatory. It's helpful for Supreme to be interrogatory. It's helpful for Steven to like be super like sticking to logic and holding people to their words and whatever. It's just, it's not helpful for you in your day-to-day life. It's not helpful for you to strangle people with their own words, right? Like those things aren't helpful. They're counter to your cause and you don't have to do them because you're not playing to an audience, right? And so that's mostly what I'm going for here.
If the answer is yes, then do you not think that your rhetoric was really shit that in an area where we're in the upper percentile of being open about critiquing men's behavior, that you happen to literally trigger the entire chat room full of people about your bad rhetoric?
If you have people in your chat who like are like thinking that I'm talking about genocide if I say abolish men.
Nobody's thinking that. I'm waiting. Okay.
I got the straight reply from that actually. So you're advocating for genocide? Yeah, like that was the exact reply I got.
Oh, okay, cool. That one person inside of this chat room thought you were saying that. Cool. That's really cool. What I'm talking about is the vast majority of people in here did not think you were talking about genocide. They thought that you were just being cringe as fuck, hyper criticizing men without even any regard for being an actual gender abolitionist. When in which you regarded me as a gender abolitionist.
I'm probably not a complete gender abolitionist.
Sure, I don't. Sure, I don't. Yeah, I don't care. And so if we're regarding me and you talking to me about my gender abolitionism, I would say that just as much as we need to abolish men, we need to abolish women in the same exact way.
I think the concept of woman can and has been reformed. I think the concept of man currently is pretty fucking broken.
Do you think that's
take a long ass time to reform.
Maybe this is not an argument that you can actually handle. Maybe do you think that's because we don't actually consider men's problem to be a high priority, and that's why we don't have an equivalent for feminism for men?
Do you know what the root of men's problems is?
That's you. I'm asking you to answer my question.
It's men, right? Like, it's the concept of men.
Okay.
It's the concept of masculinity. That's why men have higher suicide rates, higher imprisonment rates, higher drug addiction rates, higher homelessness rates. Right?
I'll ask the question again because you refuse to answer. All right?
Jesus Christ, Rele.
You're refusing to answer.
Okay.
So, like, something like that. If you're in your everyday life, the way that you respond to somebody who's not answering a question in a way that you like or you don't feel they understood it is not to say, so I'm going to repeat this because you're clearly trying to not answer my fucking question. Like, oh, no. Like, don't do that, right? Like, if you're in a regular conversation with people, a better alternative, because you don't have an audience in front of you, right, that's listening to everything, is to be like, listen, let them finish, repeat back what they had said to you, demonstrate that you understood what they said to you, the importance of what they said to you, then shift gears, re-ask your question, and ask in a way, ideally, that shows some understanding of what they had said before. So if she says, blah, 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 the problem of men are inherently flawed, yada, 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 then you go, okay, so like, I definitely understand that there are huge differences historically and culturally with how feminism and the idea of a woman has been brought about. Like you said before, this has been something that's changed over time. I would agree that men more or less has been a static thing and that there is a lot of toxic aspects to that, like you just explained. So setting that aside, what I really want to know is, and then repeat your question, like demonstrate an understanding so somebody feels heard, something really, really key to do. Do not comment at any point in the question that follows on the fact that they did not respond to your initial question. You want to know why? Because it does nothing to help you, right? If I say, hey, you're not really answering my question or whatever, now they feel like they're attacked because that was an attack. That doesn't help you to get an answer. That just demonstrates your frustration and your perception of an inability or them making the choice not to answer your question. So that's not going to be helpful to you. Just repeating the question, maybe in a way that's incorporating what they just told you because they heard a question, they gave an answer, and somewhere in that game of telephone, it got fucked up, right? That's human communication for you, right? So try to figure that out too if you can. And sometimes there is an answer there and you see why they answered your question in a way that was unsatisfying. That's why, and I think this gets lost in translation, and now I am going to reference another streamer. When I talk to Steven, I often try to be very specific and push back when he says they didn't ever answer this question. They didn't give any answers to this question because, and maybe I need to be more clear about this, for the people at home, if you took an answer that was a legitimate answer that the other person cooked up for you, like if your wife makes you a dinner, right? And you're like, hey babe, I would really like some like Mediterranean food tonight. That thing you made last week was really good. I hope we could have that. And then she cooks like spaghetti and you go, yeah, she didn't even fucking cook me dinner. You didn't even fucking cook me dinner. Like, I didn't ask for fucking Mediterranean. Like, well, hold on a minute, bitch. I cooked you dinner. I cooked you fucking spaghetti. Your ungrateful ass doesn't even consider spaghetti a fucking dinner? Fuck you. Then I'm not answering any of your fucking questions. I'm not cooking you any food. Because fuck off. If you are not even willing to admit that I had cooked something for you in the first place, that I had made you dinner, we're starting at way different fucking levels. And I am at the level of reality and you are operating at the level of fucking fantasy. Because I did give you something, right? So you do not need to step into this untruthful zone of I didn't get an answer. Like, no, you got an answer that was unsatisfying, right? I may understand why the answer is unsatisfying, as I do in many of the conversations where Steven says he didn't get answers, right? But I really want to be specific because it's really bad if people go into their personal lives and when someone answers a question in a really unsatisfying way or in a way that like shows that they didn't understand the question, the response is not to say that they didn't give you an answer. They didn't answer your fucking question, right? Like the response is going to be to acknowledge whatever they said, because that's going to help it to not repeat again, and then to ask your question again, and ideally to incorporate what they just told you into your new question so that they do not repeat that answer to you again, because you don't want to repeat the exact same verbatim question, because when you gave that input into the human machine, the output from the human machine was something that you said was undesirable and did not answer your question. So do not give the same input again. Take a bit of what it gave you as an output, show that you understood that, and create a question in a way that's not going to give you that same output again. That way, when you re-roll the human machine to give you a new answer, it's less likely to be the same thing again. Otherwise, we start looping, right? So, I don't think I communicate that enough, but it's a really bad habit to get into, to consider unhelpful or unsatisfying answers to be not answers at all, because the other person doesn't perceive it that way. The other person perceives it as they had heard a question, maybe they heard it wrong, right? Maybe they heard your question incorrectly. Maybe they do have some alternative agenda like they do in these debate conversations, but in real life, probably not. Probably not. They probably are not considering some giant agenda and they're worried about looking dumb or something. They may have honestly misunderstood what you were looking for in that question, right? Because a question is an imperfect way of getting answers that you want out of a person as well. There could be flaws in even the way that you ask the question, right? There could be faults at so many levels that to pin it all on like a lack of an answer is silly when the person gave you an answer. So take that answer, be grateful for it, but work towards getting the answer that you want and realize that that may require work on your end, whether it's editing the question or acknowledging the answer that they gave you. A lot of good faith would be needed to do this. Let's not talk about good faith, bad faith when we're talking about you at home with your mom, with your dad, with your coworkers, with your friends. Like, this does not really factor into human conversation. Let's get away from that, because I'm talking about you talking with friends and stuff. If you are choosing to have a conversation where you feel it's super necessary, you get answers to your questions, where you're maybe in an argument with them, you should be coming in with good faith. We shouldn't even need to talk about good faith or bad faith, because you're having a fucking private conversation with people in your life, right? Like, this shouldn't even come into question, right? Like, you just need to like act in a way in line with what your goal is. Your goal is to get an answer. Your goal is not to ask a question in one singular way and always get one singular answer that tickles your pickle in just the right way and feels like the answer you were looking for. If it always tickled your pickle in the right way and was always the perfect answer, you're talking to a clone of yourself. And the world is full of people who, unfortunately or fortunately in my opinion, are not clones of yourself, and they're going to give you answers you did not expect, you could not predict, right? And you're just going to have to live with that. You're just going to have to deal with that and not attribute that to malice, not attribute that to stupidity. Like, it's much easier to just take the kind of, what's it called? The stoic kind of point of view that you only have control over your half of the conversation, and to do a better job of asking that question again and of demonstrating you understood what they said so it doesn't come up again.
It's the problem with the concept of white, right? Which is why we say like abolish whiteness, right? Rather than like abolish blackness, even though like pretty much everybody who speaks on the issue of race would probably be like, yeah, total racial abolition eventually is probably the good idea.
I would argue both of those things are cringe. I don't want that. I don't want that. I don't like the rhetoric of abolishing whiteness either. I'm not down with that. No.
Okay.
We're talking about like bad optics, eh? And she's like, well, the kind of like idea behind bad optics, eh, is actually a very similar idea to what we got going on in bad optics B. Like, yeah. Exactly. So perhaps, just perhaps, we have a problem with the idea that you're using because it's connected to two things that are like really, really bad optics, right? Now, what Rele could have done right? Because we're seeing a pattern here, is to point to this idea or point to this style or point to the rhetoric thing and say, yeah, that's a problem in both of these cases. Like, I understand the meaning, right? And this gets back to like what my advice to you guys is when you're having conversations in your regular life. Show that you understood what they were talking about. Talk about how like, so I totally get bad optics A, like we're discussing in the meaning that you meant for that. And I totally get bad optics B and the meaning that we're meant to get from that. But my problem is that this idea in the middle, this idea here, is difficult, right? This concept, the approach for both of these bad optical positions, and I think it's stopping you from getting people to understand the meaning that took all of this conversing here to get, and that took all of this conversing here to get. So to remove all of the conversing that it takes, we need to remove this bad idea or this bad approach to explaining the meaning behind these two concepts, right? Because if you're talking about like audience members or people, it's not processing for them, right? So like this could have been a really good approach to this given what Vivian is giving him here, but I don't think he's going to do that, right? He's not going to bring it all the way around to that. But that would be my advice, right? And it's incorporating what I'm telling you guys to do all the time, which is really demonstrate an understanding for what the other person is telling you. Use their words as your own to put forward a case for what you think the problem is. And I think that that's really, really helpful. Okay. Was really just completely missing Vivian's point. The concept of man causes women's problems. It's not men that cause the problems for women, but society, which men and women reinforce. We have a soundbite for questions like that.
I prefer really not to speak. If I speak, I am in big trouble. In big trouble. And I don't want to be in big trouble.
I'm what you would call a power user, bruh. I'm a fucking power user.